Anthony Burgess discusses his writing, including his new novel, Any Old Iron, with Michael Schmidt.
Anthony Burgess has now written his 30th novel. This would be quite an achievement, but as well as 30 novels, he's written a quantity of books of criticism, essays, polemics, reviews, and he is a great giver of interviews as well. It's a privilege and a pleasure to have him here today to discuss his new novel, Any Old Iron, and to discuss, I hope, other questions which his work at large gives rise to. Anthony Burgess, I think you're one of the most copious writers in English fiction and so many other genres since Ford Madox Ford, something of which you, I think, rightly make a virtue. And you seem to stigmatize the general run of English writers for being so parsimonious with their talents.
Yes, I think that what you call so kindly copiousness is regarded as a vice rather than a virtue in this country. Of course, I'm so glad you mentioned the man who I think is the greatest British novelist of the century, namely Ford Madox Ford, who wrote far more than I did because it was his trade. He was an old man mad about writing, he said, and one can see why. He was trying to write well. And I think the only way you can write, or try to write well, is by writing a lot. We've had this tradition in England, I think, of the somewhat constipated oeuvres of, say, Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, and even, I'm afraid, T.S. Eliot, which have been established as a kind of gentlemanly or ladylike norm. You know, you mustn't go beyond it. If you write a lot, it's obvious that you're doing it for a living, and that's ungentlemanly.
You do use the word impotence when you talk about Forster, a sort of creative impotence, and about Virginia Woolf debility and anemia. And there's the language of illness that you seem to use in referring to this parsimoniousness, and also as kind of sexual language. Is the act of writing in some way sexually driven? As far as
I think it is. I think it is cognate with the libido. I think there is a libidinous element in writing. Of course, one can't really prove this, but the writers I've admired, I mean, apart from people like Joyce and so forth, Conrad and the rest, for their copiousness, people like Balzac and Dickens and later, you know, Arnold Bennett, H.G. Wells, seem to have the strong libidinous element. They're not sort of slippered recluses. They're in the big world, and Wells, of course, above all, was a great fornicator. And he regarded this as an aspect of the job he had to do to fecundate England. You know, he saw England as a kind of naked, allegorical figure that he had the job of copulating with and making it beget a new world.
Stendhal always used, I think, to say that if he had any sexual experience at all, he lost a novel. You don't feel this hoarding of seed rather than spreading of seed is necessary?
No, I think that sounds to be a little neurotic. On the other hand, Goethe never wrote a poem without having a new love affair. Yes, well, Stendhal, of course, an admirable novelist, admirable man, but and also a highly sexed man. His book on love is remarkable, but I think he was wrong about that. I think the two go together. I think in me, certainly the creative impulse is normally associated with a strong sexual drive. This may be only a kind of imaginary analogue, but I think there may well be something in it.
Talking about your copiousness, there is, as it were, qualifying that copiousness, a sense that there is a kind of subsoil or a stratum of experience, of lived experience, to which you return again and again, with a vision of the battlements, which was, I think, written in 1949. Yes, you had the Gibraltar setting and some of the Gibraltar incidents. With ABBA, you had Manchester, and in fact, lots of places. Yes, there is, in a sense, a continual return to the same, if not subjects, at least subject matter.
Well, I think that applies to a lot of novelists. I mean, some novelists are, I think, almost blatant about it. Your great Nobel Prize winner, Saul Bellow, never gets out of Chicago, never gets out of the intellectual Jewish milieu, and of course Joyce never gets away from Dublin. I think on the whole, with the 30 novels, I've done well. I will not boast, but I've done rather well. I think in not sticking to the same milieu, not sticking to the same subject, and getting away. It's becoming more difficult now, of course. After 30 novels, you then begin to wonder whether you can continue to write something fresh and different from the others.
Also, if you're out of touch with the spoken language of England today, or the lived language, is there not a natural impulse to go back to memory, to the past? And
I think we all do that, but I think chiefly not because we know the past better than we know the present, but because, unfortunately, we're living in such a relativist age. We tend automatically to go back to a period when things seem firmer. I know the Manchester I knew was, the great cottonopolis, the great industrial centre of the world. Now it's rather a pleasant little town, which is no longer of any great world significance. I don't think that one is naturally, inevitably glorifying the past, but one knows the past better. It's difficult for me it would be difficult for me to write about the present, but I'm going to try. I'm going to hold myself up in a London suburb. I won't say where, and get down to writing a novel about now, if I can.
You suggested in an interview that 30 novels was enough, but you've just animadverted just a few moments ago that you are going to hole up in an English suburb and write another English novel.
Well, I don't see what else I can do. I wish to God there were other things to do, but I don't see what else there is. The writing is so difficult. The production of a good book is so hard that I feel that one has to push on with the heavy task of trying to master the language. I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge who said he thanked God that he'd mastered English. That's a terrible thing to say, but nobody masters it, as you know. And one must go on to the limit, trying to master it at least. Life is not long enough.
Anthony Burgess, thank you very much.